It was a quiet evening in Tokyo, the kind where neon lights glow softly against wet pavement and the city hums without shouting. Steven Seagal walked alone down a narrow street near a row of small restaurants, hands relaxed at his sides, dressed plainly in a dark jacket and loose pants. No bodyguards, no cameras, just another foreigner blending into the rhythm of the city. To most people passing by, he looked unremarkable, older, calm, heavy-set, moving without urgency. Definitely not someone you'd expect trouble from, or trouble for. But a few meters behind him, a group of men had taken interest. They stood near the corner of the street, tattoos peeking from under their sleeves, eyes sharp and calculating. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Their presence alone shifted the air. These were street-level enforcers, men who made their living off intimidation and fear. And to them, Steven Seagal looked like an easy target. One of them muttered something in Japanese. Another smirked. They followed. Steven sensed it not with panic, but with awareness, the sound of footsteps matching his pace, the subtle change in energy behind him. He didn't turn around. He didn't speed up. His breathing stayed slow, controlled, almost meditative. The group closed in as he reached a quieter stretch of the street. One man stepped ahead, blocking his path. Another brushed his shoulder from behind, deliberately hard. "Watch where you're going," the man said with a mocking tone. Steven stopped. For a brief moment, the street felt frozen. A couple across the road pretended not to notice. A shop owner slowly pulled his metal shutter halfway down. Everyone nearby understood something was about to happen and that it wasn't their business. Steven turned slowly, his expression calm, unreadable. His eyes moved from one face to another, not with fear, but with assessment. "Excuse me," he said quietly. The men laughed. To them, this was already decided. Numbers were on their side. The setting was isolated, and the man in front of them looked like someone who wouldn't resist. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the man standing before them had spent decades in Japan, training under legendary martial arts masters, that he wasn't just an action movie star, that his calm wasn't weakness, it was control. And as the circle around him tightened, one truth loomed silently in the air. They hadn't followed a victim, they had followed a bone-breaking machine, and they were seconds away from realizing their mistake. The laughter lingered in the air, sharp and deliberate. The men spread out slowly, forming a loose semicircle around Steven Seagal, cutting off the narrow street behind him. Their movements were casual, almost lazy but practiced. This wasn't their first time cornering someone. One of them stepped forward, chewing gum, eyes full of mockery. "You lost, old man," he said in broken English, smirking. "This street, not good for tourists." Steven didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, shoulders relaxed, hands open, posture neutral. His face showed no anger, no fear, just quiet awareness. He glanced briefly down the street, then back at the man in front of him. "I'm fine," Steven replied calmly. "I'm just passing through." That calmness irritated them. Another man laughed loudly and shoved Steven's shoulder, harder this time. "You don't understand," he said. "We're talking to you." A few steps away, a pair of pedestrians slowed, sensing the tension. One discreetly reached for his phone. In Tokyo, scenes like this were rare, but when they happened, people knew better than to intervene. Steven shifted his weight slightly, almost unnoticeably. His eyes flicked to each man in turn, counting, measuring distance, noting balance. His breathing remained slow, steady, controlled. One of the men circled behind him, testing space. Another stepped closer, invading Steven's personal boundary. "You have money?" the leader asked, his tone turning colder. "Wallet? Phone?" Steven looked at him, expression unchanged. "I don't want trouble," he said evenly. The leader scoffed. "Trouble already here." A hand reached out and grabbed Steven's sleeve, gripping tight. The man leaned in close, expecting resistance or fear. He got neither. Steven didn't pull away. He didn't tense up. He simply looked down at the hand on his arm, then back up at the man's face. "Let go," he said quietly. The softness of his voice made them laugh again. "Or what?" the man replied. Around them, the street had gone almost silent. The distant sound of traffic, a train horn far away. Even the neon signs seemed to buzz more loudly now. The shop owner who had pulled down his shutter earlier was watching through a narrow gap, heart pounding. Steven exhaled slowly. You don't want this, he said, not as a threat, not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact. The leader tilted his head, studying him for the first time. Something about Steven's eyes didn't match the rest of him. They weren't confused. They weren't desperate. They were clear, focused. Still, pride pushed him forward. What are you going to do? He sneered. You think you're some kind of tough guy? Steven didn't answer. Instead, he took a small step to the side, subtly adjusting his position so he wasn't boxed in. The movement was so smooth, so natural, that it barely registered, but it changed everything. The grip on his sleeve tightened, unknowingly stepping into a trap. The men thought they were in control. They thought they were playing with a harmless foreigner. They had no idea they were standing inches away from someone who had spent his life mastering patience, balance, and devastating efficiency. And as the tension reached a breaking point, the street seemed to hold its breath. If you were witnessing this moment right now, would you walk away or stay and watch? Comment below and tell me which country and city you're watching this from, because what was about to happen next was going to change everything. The grip on Steven Seagal's sleeve tightened. The man holding him leaned in closer now, his breath heavy with arrogance. You're very calm, he said, almost offended by it. That makes me think you don't understand how bad this can get. Steven looked at the man's hand again, still gripping his sleeve, knuckles whitening with pressure. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his eyes to meet his. I understand perfectly, Steven said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't shake. It didn't carry fear or ego. It carried certainty. That was the moment the mood shifted. The men around him stopped laughing. The leader's smile faded slightly, replaced by irritation. Calmness, like this, wasn't normal. Fear they could handle. Begging, anger, resistance, those were familiar. But this quiet, grounded confidence, unsettled them. One of the men behind Steven reached out and poked him in the back. Hey, he said, you ignoring us? Steven didn't turn around. Instead, he spoke to the man holding his sleeve. This is the last time I'll ask you, he said quietly. Let go. The leader laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Or what? He repeated, louder, as if daring Steven to answer differently. The man gripping Steven's sleeve gave it a sharp yank, trying to pull him off balance. It didn't work. Steven's body moved as one solid unit, rooted to the ground. The yank only pulled the attacker closer. Closing distance he didn't understand was dangerous. A few bystanders nearby noticed it too, the way Steven hadn't even shifted, the way his posture remained perfectly upright. Someone whispered, That's strange. The leader stepped closer, now only inches away from Steven's face. You think you're special? He hissed. You think you can talk to us like that? Steven finally turned his head slightly, acknowledging the rest of the group. His eyes scanned them again, not nervously, but clinically. He saw poor stances, overconfidence, weight on heels, hands too high, no coordination. Years of training did the thinking for him. Gentlemen, Steven said, I don't want to hurt anyone tonight. That sentence should have de-escalated the situation. Instead, it did the opposite. The leader scoffed. Hurt us? He shoved Steven's chest with his free hand. You? The shove was meant to provoke a reaction, to trigger anger, to make Steven lash out wildly so they could swarm him. But Steven didn't react the way they expected. He didn't stumble. He didn't swing. He inhaled slowly through his nose. You're making a mistake, he said. That was the warning. The man behind Steven reached for his shoulder again, this time more aggressively. At the same moment, the man gripping Steven's sleeve shifted his stance, preparing to pull or strike. They were done playing. The street felt impossibly tight now. Neon light reflected off wet pavement. A delivery truck passed at the far end of the road, unaware of how close violence was to erupting. A young couple across the street had stopped walking entirely, eyes wide, frozen between fear and curiosity. Steven closed his eyes for half a second, not in fear, in focus. When he opened them, something had changed. His posture was still relaxed, but now it was aligned, balanced, ready. All right, the leader said coldly, nodding to his men. Teach him. The hand on Steven's sleeve pulled hard again, too hard. That was the fatal mistake. In one smooth motion, Steven stepped slightly offline, rotating his body just enough that the pull redirected the attacker's own force. At the same time, Steven's hand came up, not striking, not punching, but controlling the wrist. The man didn't even realize what had happened. 1 second he was gripping fabric. The next, his wrist was locked at an unnatural angle, his shoulder twisted, his balance completely gone. A sharp cry escaped his mouth, not from pain yet, but from shock. Steven's voice cut through the moment, calm and firm. "Stop!" The word echoed louder than any shout. The leader froze. The man behind Steven halted mid-step, eyes locked on his friend's contorted arm. The grip was gone now. Steven wasn't squeezing. He wasn't straining. He was simply holding the joint at a point where resistance was impossible. "This ends now," Steven said quietly. "Step back." The man whose wrist was trapped began to panic. Hey, wait." Steven applied the slightest pressure, just enough to remind him what was at stake. The sound that followed wasn't a crack. It was a soft, sickening pop. The man screamed and dropped to his knees. The street exploded into chaos. "What the hell? Did you see that? Call the police." The leader staggered backward, shock written all over his face. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. This wasn't a scared tourist. This wasn't an easy win. This was something else. Steven released the man's arm, letting him collapse onto the pavement, clutching his shoulder in agony. Steven took 1 step back, hands open again, breathing steady. "I warned you," he said. The remaining men hesitated now, fear replacing arrogance. And for the first time since they chose him as a target, they realized the truth. They hadn't cornered a victim, they had awakened someone who had been trying very hard, not to hurt anyone at all. At this point, what do you think the group should do, walk away or keep pushing? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. 2 wires planned, because what happened next was even more shocking than the first move. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The man on the ground screamed in pain, clutching his shoulder, rolling slightly as shock hit him in waves. His cries echoed off the narrow walls of the street, cutting through the neon-lit silence like an alarm. The sound alone sent a chill through everyone watching. The remaining men stared at him, then at Steven. This wasn't part of the plan. The leader's confidence wavered, but only for a moment. Pride is a dangerous thing, especially when it's wounded in front of witnesses. His jaw tightened, fists clenching as embarrassment burned hotter than fear. "You think this is over?" he snapped, trying to reclaim control. "You just broke my man." Steven stood calmly a few steps away, hands relaxed at his sides. His breathing was slow, controlled, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. "He grabbed me," Steven said evenly. "I asked him to stop." The leader glanced at the bystanders. Phones were out now, multiple angles, red recording lights blinking in the darkness. That only made him angrier. "Turn those off," he barked. No one listened. Steven met the leader's eyes. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction, just resolve. "Walk away," Steven said. "Take him and go." For a brief moment, it looked like the leader might actually listen. But then one of the men behind him muttered, "Boss? We can't just leave." That single sentence sealed it. The leader straightened up, chest puffed out, masking doubt with aggression. "You think you can embarrass us like this?" he shouted. "You think one lucky move makes you something special?" Steven didn't respond. He didn't need to. The leader raised his hand and snapped his fingers. 2 men moved at once. One rushed from Steven's left, swinging wildly. The other came in from the right, aiming to grab him around the waist. They were angry, now reckless, emotional, no longer coordinated, and that was their second mistake. Steven stepped forward instead of back. Time seemed to slow. As the first attacker's arm came swinging in, Steven turned his body just enough to let the punch miss entirely. His forearm connected gently, almost softly, against the attacker's elbow. There was a sharp crack as the joint hyperextended. The man screamed before he even hit the ground. In the same motion, Steven pivoted, his hips rotating smoothly. The second attacker lunged too far, his balance completely off. Steven's hand slid under the man's chin while his other hand guided the shoulder not with force, but with precision. The man's feet left the ground. He hit the pavement hard, the air knocked out of him in a violent gasp. The crowd gasped as one. "No way," someone whispered. The leader's face drained of color. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't luck. This was control. Steven never struck with anger, never overcommitted. Every movement was minimal, efficient, almost gentle to watch, yet devastating in effect. The street that had once felt small now felt even tighter, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. One man hesitated, backing away instinctively. Another froze. Unsure whether to attack or run, Steven took a slow step forward. Enough, he said. The leader swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the injured men on the ground, one screaming, one unconscious, one clutching a twisted arm. Fear crept into his voice despite his effort to sound tough. Who are you? He asked. Steven paused. I'm someone who tried to give you a chance, he replied. The leader clenched his fists again, desperation pushing him to one final, reckless decision. With a shout, he rushed forward himself, throwing a wide punch fueled by anger and humiliation. It never landed. Steven stepped inside the punch, closing the distance instantly. His hand caught the leader's wrist, turning it palm up in a smooth arc. His other hand pressed lightly against the elbow. There was a sudden, unmistakable snap. The leader cried out and dropped to his knees, face twisted in pain and disbelief. Steven released him immediately. The street went dead silent. Only the groans of injured men and the distant hum of the city remained. Steven stood there, calm as ever, looking at the group now scattered and broken around him. He hadn't chased anyone. He hadn't continued once the threat was gone. He had done exactly what was necessary, nothing more. A bystander finally spoke, voice trembling. That wasn't a fight, another whispered. That was training. Steven adjusted his jacket, glanced once more at the men on the ground, then looked down the street. You should have walked away, he said quietly. And as sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, one truth became painfully clear to everyone present. The biggest mistake those men made wasn't choosing a fight. It was choosing the wrong man. Because they hadn't attacked a movie star, they had attacked a master who had been holding back all along. The street no longer belonged to the men who had tried to control it. It belonged to silence. 3 of them were down now, one curled on the pavement clutching his arm, another struggling to breathe. The leader on his knees, face pale, one hand cradling a wrist that no longer moved the way it should. The remaining 2 stood frozen, eyes wide, their confidence completely erased. They had come looking for fear. Instead, they had found precision. Steven Seagal stood in the center of it all, breathing slow and even, as if he had merely stepped aside from a passing crowd. His posture remained relaxed, shoulders loose, hands open. There was no follow-up attack, no pursuit, no showmanship. That was what terrified them most. One of the remaining men took an unconscious step backward. His heel scraped against the pavement, the sound loud in the unnatural quiet. Steven's eyes moved to him, not sharply, not threateningly, but with awareness. The man froze. Steven didn't advance. He didn't need to. Pick them up, Steven said calmly, gesturing toward the injured men. And leave. His voice carried authority without volume. It wasn't a demand fueled by ego. It was instruction, clear, final. The man hesitated, glancing at the leader on the ground. Do it, the leader muttered through clenched teeth, humiliation burning through his pain. The remaining men rushed to help their fallen friends, movements awkward and frantic now. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the mockery. Every motion screamed panic. As they lifted one man, he cried out in agony, his arm hanging at a sickening angle. Steven turned slightly away, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because the threat was over. He had no interest in watching suffering. Violence, to him, had never been entertainment. Around them, bystanders whispered in disbelief. That wasn't normal. Did you see how fast that ended? He barely touched them. Someone replayed the footage on their phone, hands shaking. Slow motion revealed what the eye had missed in real time. How Steven redirected force instead of meeting it. How joints were controlled rather than struck. How balance was taken before pain ever arrived. This wasn't street fighting. This was art. One man finally found the courage to speak, his voice low. He didn't punch anyone. Another replied, That's worse. Steven walked a few steps toward the edge of the street, giving the group space to retreat. He checked his surroundings calmly. No tunnel vision, no adrenaline rush clouding his judgment. Years of discipline kept his mind clear. The men began backing away, half dragging their injured companions. No one said another word. They didn't threaten. They didn't shout. They didn't dare. As they retreated, the leader looked up one last time, eyes filled not with anger now, but fear and confusion. You could have killed us, he said hoarsely. Steven stopped and looked back. I know, he replied. That was all. The men disappeared down the street, wounded pride heavier than their injuries. Only then did the tension fully release. Bystanders exhaled. Someone laughed nervously. Another wiped sweat from his brow. A shop owner finally raised his shutter again, peering out cautiously as if unsure whether the danger was truly gone. Steven stood alone for a moment, the neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement around him. He adjusted his jacket, rolled his shoulders slightly, loosening muscles not from strain, but from restraint. A young man nearby approached carefully, keeping distance. "Sir," he said respectfully, Are you okay?" Steven nodded. "I'm fine. You handled that like..." The man stopped, searching for words. "Like someone who's done this before?" Steven offered gently. The man swallowed and nodded. Steven gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I try not to." Police sirens grew louder now, approaching from both ends of the street. Red and blue lights reflected off the buildings, washing the scene in flashes of color. Steven looked down the street once more, considering his options. He hadn't broken the law. Witnesses knew it. Cameras had captured everything. Still, he knew how situations like this could be misunderstood. He chose to stay, not out of fear but responsibility. As officers began to arrive, people stepped forward, voices overlapping. They attacked him first. He warned them. He tried to leave. Steven stood quietly, hands visible, calm as ever. One officer looked at him closely, then paused. His eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but recognition. "Wait a second." The officer murmured. Steven met his gaze, saying nothing, because the truth was about to surface. And when it did, it would explain everything: the calm, the control, the devastating efficiency. But more importantly, it would leave everyone who witnessed that night with one unforgettable lesson. The most dangerous people in the world are not the loudest, not the fastest, not the most aggressive. They are the ones who remain calm. When everyone else loses control, the police officers approached cautiously, their eyes scanning the street, the neon lights reflecting off their badges. The remaining gang members had backed away, dragging their injured comrades behind them, their confidence shattered. The street was quiet now, except for the occasional groan of the wounded and the faint hum of distant traffic. Steven Seagal remained standing in the center, calm and collected. His hands were visible, his posture relaxed, almost casual, but there was a presence about him that commanded attention. People nearby whispered among themselves, their phones still recording, capturing the scene from multiple angles. "Sir," one of the officers called out, voice firm but cautious. "What happened here?" Steven didn't immediately respond. Instead, he let the chaos speak for itself. The men on the ground, clutching their twisted arms and shoulders, made the story clear enough. The silence after the confrontation was more powerful than words. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a voice rose. "Wait, that's Steven Seagal." The words rippled through the street like electricity. Bystanders gasped and stepped back, some taking a second glance. Phones were raised higher, live streams now switching to the correct angle. "The real Steven Seagal?" someone whispered. "The Aikido master? The action star? The leader?" Still clutching his injured wrist, froze. His eyes widened, disbelief and fear overtaking his previous arrogance. He hadn't recognized the man when they first cornered him. They had assumed they were intimidating an ordinary foreigner, someone naive and vulnerable. But now the truth was undeniable. Even the police officer who had spoken initially leaned in, squinting. Recognition dawned on his face. You're Steven Seagal," he said cautiously. Steven nodded slightly, acknowledging the recognition but saying nothing more. There was no gloating, no swagger. He didn't need to assert his fame. His actions had already done that. The crowd around them grew louder, whispers turning into murmurs of awe and disbelief. "Did you see that? Those moves?" He didn't even raise his voice. He just controlled them, like it was nothing. The leader struggled to stand but collapsed back to his knees, overwhelmed by the realization of what had just happened. His men glanced nervously at him, their eyes wide, unsure how to act in the face of someone they had severely underestimated. One of the injured men tried to speak, voice trembling. We thought you were just a movie guy. We didn't know." Steven looked down at them. His expression remained calm, his tone even, as he said, "I didn't want anyone hurt. You made your choices. You brought this on yourselves." The remaining gang members scrambled to retreat, dragging their injured comrades along. They didn't argue. They didn't resist. Fear had replaced arrogance. Their numbers, once intimidating, now meant nothing against the reality of Steven's skill and composure. The crowd erupted into cheers, applause echoing through the narrow street. People began recording videos and calling friends, spreading the news immediately. Cameras captured Steven's every movement, steady, controlled, unshaken. A young bystander whispered in awe, "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that, not in real life." Steven adjusted his jacket slightly and gave a small nod, acknowledging the crowd's respect without drawing attention to himself. His lesson was clear. Strength is not measured by aggression, but by control, awareness, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The police officers finally approached, now fully aware of the situation. They assessed the injured gang members and began taking statements from witnesses. One officer looked at Steven with newfound respect. "You didn't even fight. You just controlled them," he said, shaking his head. Steven's reply was quiet, almost philosophical. Control is stronger than force. Calm is stronger than anger. The crowd around him nodded, some murmuring in agreement. Phones continued to record, the footage destined to go viral. People knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, an encounter that went far beyond a street fight. Have you ever seen someone stay calm under extreme pressure? Type peace in the comments if you believe real strength comes from self-control, not aggression. The gang had completely vanished from the street, leaving behind only the echoes of their mistakes. Steven remained, watching briefly as the city returned to its normal rhythm. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. There was no victory in humiliation, only the knowledge that respect and awareness matter more than brute force. By the time the police had finished speaking with witnesses and began clearing the street, the scene had already started trending online. Clips of the confrontation appeared on social media, showing every calculated move, every moment of restraint and control. Comments flooded in from around the world, admiration, disbelief, and awe at what had just transpired. Steven took a deep breath and began walking down the street again, quietly, as if he had never been involved. But the impression he left behind was indelible. A lesson in control, discipline, and the devastating power of a calm mind in the face of reckless aggression. And in that quiet walk through Tokyo's neon-lit streets, one truth became unmistakably clear to everyone who had witnessed the event. Underestimate no one, not even the man who looks ordinary, not even the man who appears calm. Because sometimes, the quietest person is also the deadliest and the most controlled. By the time the sirens faded into the distance and the crowd began to disperse, the reality of what had happened on that narrow Tokyo street was sinking in. Phones were still recording, live streams were still uploading, and the whispers of awe were spreading like wildfire. Steven Seagal had walked through what could have been a violent confrontation and emerged not only unscathed but completely in control, leaving a group of Yakuza members terrified and humiliated. The footage hit social media almost immediately. Within hours, clips of the encounter were trending worldwide. Millions of viewers were captivated, commenting in shock and admiration. "This is insane. Did you see how calm he stayed?" Real martial arts isn't about rage, it's about control. For many, it wasn't just the physical skill that impressed them, it was the mental discipline. Steven hadn't fought to dominate. He hadn't sought revenge. Every movement had been precise, measured, and purposeful. The world was reminded that mastery isn't measured by theatrics. It's measured by restraint. Under pressure, news outlets began covering the story, sharing clips from multiple angles, and interviewing eyewitnesses. Bystanders described a scene that seemed almost cinematic. A quiet street lit by neon lights, the tension thick in the air, and a single man standing calm while chaos swirled around him. Experts in martial arts weighed in online, praising the efficiency and restraint he demonstrated. To the world, Steven Seagal was no longer just an action star. He was a living demonstration of what true martial discipline looks like in the real world. The Yakuza members involved faced immediate consequences. Police records documented the injuries they had sustained, and internal investigations began into the incident. The story wasn't just about their failure, it became a lesson in underestimating the wrong person. Their arrogance and ignorance had led them into a confrontation they were utterly unprepared for. Meanwhile, Steven didn't seek publicity. He didn't post to social media or boast about the event. His actions had already done all the talking necessary. To him, this wasn't about fame, it was about teaching a simple truth. Respect, awareness, and control are far more powerful than anger and aggression. Interviews with him later highlighted that philosophy. Strength isn't about who hits the hardest, he said calmly. Strength is about knowing when to act, staying composed, and making the right decision in the moment. That's what separates fear from respect. Fans and martial artists alike shared the videos, dissecting each move, each step, each calm, deliberate breath. Commentary spread across forums and social media platforms worldwide. Some viewers were amazed by the technical skill. Others were inspired by the mental fortitude on display. A global conversation began not about violence, but about self-control, discipline, and the power of calmness under pressure. Meanwhile, the incident became a source of lessons for people in all walks of life. Business leaders, teachers, parents, and students began using it as an example of how staying composed can resolve situations far more effectively than rash action. Parents shared the story with their children as a demonstration that real courage often isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and disciplined. Steven's influence went beyond the immediate encounter. Within days, the footage had millions of views, trending in multiple countries, and inspiring countless online discussions. Martial arts schools shared the video as a teaching tool, illustrating principles of leverage, joint control, and situational awareness. People everywhere began posting their own thoughts. "I want to handle life's challenges like that," wrote one viewer. Calm, precise, controlled. For Steven, the lesson was simple. Power is respect, not intimidation. Violence is a last resort. The right mindset and steady control can disarm the most dangerous situations without unnecessary escalation. As the city returned to its normal rhythm, the memory of that night lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it and in the hearts of those who saw it online. The story became more than a viral video. It became a symbol of disciplined strength, humility, and the incredible impact of composure. If you believe real power comes from calm and control, type silent power in the comments. Share this story to inspire others, and subscribe for more incredible real-life encounters that teach courage, respect, and discipline. And as the world absorbed the lesson Steven Seagal had demonstrated on that quiet street, one truth became undeniable. Underestimating anyone based on appearance or assumptions is a dangerous mistake. Sometimes the quietest person is the strongest, the calmest is the most dangerous, and the most disciplined is the one everyone should respect. From that night forward, Steven Seagal wasn't just remembered as an action star, he was remembered as a living example of controlled, purposeful strength, proving to the world that true mastery is not in striking first, but in standing calm, assessing the moment, and acting with precision. The story spread globally, not as a tale of violence, but as a timeless lesson. Humility, control, and awareness can turn even the most dangerous situations into demonstrations of mastery, and sometimes, just sometimes, silence is the loudest statement of all.